Okay, if you don't see it correctly, let me know. So yeah, here I am representing my office, Archi-Tectonics New York, offices in Hangzhou and Hangzhou, China, and Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. I am from the Netherlands, so if you wonder where the accent is from. What you see on the screen here is a range of projects, and I'm showing this because what I like personally is up to 2008, we went smaller project, bigger, 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 bigger. And then 2008 happened. You all know what that is. I call it the Ice Age. And what happened is the smaller projects started to take over the bigger projects that were all frozen and on hold and all kinds of beautiful other stuff canceled. And we realized how fun it was actually to calibrate smaller projects in between the bigger ones. Building could take 5 to 10 years, a small project you finish in 3 months, 6 months. It's an interesting kind of good for your brain kind of thing. So we in the office, as everyone else probably, are very focused on the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, as I just discussed with Josh, actually, we all know construction and households alone is up to 40% of the global carbon footprint. And we look at that Anthropocene and then a little bit at monsters and mutants, monsters being hopeful monsters, I'll explain that in a minute, and how architecture can hybridize and become closer to a synthetic nature. We underestimate our direct relationship of a human to the forest. I say forest and not tree. Forest because we need the local biome of a forest. Forests are compilations of plants and fungi and mushrooms and insects and birds and the whole microcosm of that, or the microecology of that. And it became very apparent. I don't know whether I can play this again. Let me see. Yeah. It became very apparent when I took last year my students to Denmark, Denmark being so ecological or ecologically aware, and came to this island, Lasso, in the north of Denmark, where already in 1600 people had run out of trees. They had used it for heating, for building, for everything, and no more trees. So the only time they could build something was when they had a shipwreck. And then, of course, what do you do with the roof? They put seaweed on it. So it starts with about 7 feet of seaweed in the initial phase to get it watertight and insulated. And these roofs over 300 years have reduced to about a foot thick and are resistant to fungi and molds and very insulated, obviously, and quite resistant to weather. That's a good news. The bad news was the running out of wood. So as we all know, the other problem we have is that we need to keep our soils and water healthy and alive, literally, and that takes a very balanced approach. This is a bit of it's actually an existing photo. Everyone thinks this is Photoshop. It's not. It's Fukushima in 2011 after the nuclear disaster, and scientists planted sunflowers around this area that had a lot of nuclear waste. And why did they do that? Not because they were poetic or romantic souls, maybe they're that too, but sunflowers are hyperaccumulators, or flowers that are extremely good in phytoremediation, cleaning pollutants out of the soil in an extremely rapid manner. Now, not only do these flowers survive nuclear disasters and clean up the mess we caused, they also change. So what you see here is sunflowers that have gone through a process because of this environmental stress, through a process of cresting, or what we call fasciation, which means they're normally concentric, their normal concentric core has elongated and warped, and in the right case, completely turned inside out as a reaction to this pollution. And evolutionary biologists call these hopeful monsters. And they do that because they see these flowers as a start of a new lineage. So not a mutated flower, but a new lineage that is starting from that moment on, the new normal, let's say. So for us, super interesting. I've done a conference actually on the new normal. I won't go into this, but it's a very similar idea that we have to understand certain phases in progression or in evolution or in innovation as the start of a new phase, rather than constantly calling it new. So the moment the new becomes normal, we are actually allowing ourselves to accept the fact that we have to move on from there. So in building intelligence, that happens, of course, through no longer representational models, but actually prototyping, testing, developing smart skins, understanding passive solar as the best way to go, makes energy-saving buildings, prefabricate, clean sites, reduce of resources, and using renewable resources. One tower we're working currently in Rotterdam is dealing with that in the sense that we pull the public spaces up from the ground floor of the city, and the tower in the higher areas, the sky lobbies of the towers, that not only are becoming the green lungs for the spaces, but also become public spaces, as in library, gymnasium, and a restaurant. That then, of course, also here, these green lungs function because the tower itself functions as a solar chimney, which means at night cool air is pulled up in the tower that pushes the hot air out, chills the plants and the air, and also starts to create oxygen, other oxygen levels in the building. Of course, the simple way also is fritting the glass towards the south, lots of frit, toward the north, no frit. And then here you see how that tower starts to record its sky lobby or its public space along these transparent lines in the facade as this 200-meter tall tower starts to occupy my city, where I come from. These are the sky lobbies as they occupy the spaces and the tower in space. And then one of our first projects was already passive solar. This started in 1998, was ultimately done in the beginning of 2000. Freezing the carbon footprint by keeping the 6-story warehouse in place, wrapping it by an extension that's 3 times bigger, so it's next over and on top of it, that is concrete floors and folded glass. It was also one of the first parametric models where we send the 3D model with XYZ points rather than dimensions to Precursor in Spain to fold the glass. The glass is literally folded and double glazing, to Hong Kong to extrude emulsions, and then Brooklyn to unitize the glass and put it on the building as you see here. We also separated horizontal and vertical emulsions to optimize the glazing and reduce transference from inside to outside. And the glass, bending of the glass then also helps creating passive solar energy. I lived in this building and literally never had the radiators on. So it's quite amazing how that works. Of course, what you don't see here is that the facades that don't have Westlight are all double concrete with waterproofing and insulation inside. So the building is actually an incredibly heavy building. Beautiful is always this sort of inflection of old and new on top of each other with a little water tower here. And then how that works inside. The next one is a building in Tribeca where we started to think of the facade more as a calibration of private, non-private, visual, non-visual, transparent, non-transparent, understanding the apartments like sweaters. So you can buy one with a balcony in the north or the south, or 2 floors or 3 floors. Every apartment was different. What is the beauty, of course, of digital design, that you don't have to really worry about repetition while still being extremely efficient in the way you build the buildings. Also, reduction of walls rather than walls. We used floor level changes to create privacy. And of course, we prototyped this facade in Italy, funny enough, because the stone, it's a landmark building. The stone originally in Tribeca is a gray marble that is found mostly in Portugal. Then that was laminated ultra thin, so we used very little stone on glass. And what my manufacturer is pointing at here is which areas are most translucent. it's quite a mystery. It was a mystery then and now, how you choose from a 7-foot high block what it looks like. You know, the guys walked around with a little spray can where they put some water on it and said, that's the color. At which point I asked for a hose, but they didn't have that. And then here, how it works on the inside. So the calibration of these stone, translucent glass surfaces really also calibrate. This is, for example, a bedroom where we made it quite opaque. It runs then into a bathroom where the walls are made from the same stone, the gray marble. So you get a nice continuity. Pixelation, very simple, done by hanging it from the Bain frame and mullions from Schuko. It's very nice how the top is actually this duplex, which really looks like a freestanding house, but is, you know, the top of the building. And the back, where you start to see this variation, where you really can't see which apartment is what. The bottom are actually triplexes, then a bunch of full floors and a duplex, and how it fits in the neighborhood. So rather than fitting or matching a landmark building, we said we would stick to the quality of the materials in the landmark district, the proportional systems, and go from there. A very recent one is also freezing off the carbon footprint of the 4-story tiny townhouse. Client wanted to add 4 floors, and then we realized A and B doesn't make C. So C in our case became a 3rd edition, which was the climate skin that we made 3-dimensional, wraps in the front, over, and in the back. And wraps not only the building, but also exterior spaces. We have small balconies in the front that were the leftover landings of the fire stairs that we took off. It wraps over the roof terrace with green roofs and some vegetables, actually. And then on the back, on the skylight, this is a 3-side enclosed building. So quite a small amount of glass. So we really celebrated all the outdoor spaces. And here you see us test the facade. When it opens, it actually veers out like a bird wing. But when it closes, it becomes flat, as you can see here. So the facade, as it opens and closes, it transforms. Here you see how it looks when it's open. And the beauty of the climate skin, of course, is if you use this correctly, you open it in the winter and you close it in the summer, you can reduce up to 45% of the annual energy costs. Here I am in the extension. The back of the building is stairs and a glass elevator with a skylight above. And then here you see me closing the facade and how it transforms. And, you know, we recently walked by, and actually a photographer friend of ours walked by and sent us these photos. And it's really lovely to see, only like, it's about a year now, how plants are starting to take over and really start to occupy this facade and the roof in a really beautiful way. It's kind of funny how this little black tower slowly becomes green. Then I jump into a real hybrid, maybe, and a real mutant and monster project. Invited competition. It's a scale jump, I have to say. It's an invited competition 2018. 5 international officers were asked to look in the Olympics, the Asian Games. The Asian Olympics is called the Asian Games. Was supposed to play in 2022, so 4 years. 116 acres, 2 million square foot of buildings, and a stipulation, which was quite interesting, of 85% park, although we had 2 million square foot of buildings. So of course, you know, being a responsible architect, I like to build nothing or less. And I say this not lightly. We like to build very few buildings. In this case, hard, because there was a very specific program related to a specific event. So we went for the lower half of build clever, build efficient, and minimize waste. We had some very specific strategy. We used solar energy to create the lighting for the park, to have the park always be lit. A sponge city requirement came from the government that asked us to make the park a sponge city, so absorption of stormwater, filtration, and retaining of the water. Zero earth strategy we added, which meant if you excavate new wetlands and we made a connective valley, then you keep the earth on site and you actually create hills, which then absorb sound from the city. and restore the local biome. So this goes back to the tree is not a forest kind of story. Also for us important was, if you do such a big project, it should really be for the city. So we studied from the beginning in the competition who was going to occupy the site and what kind of things are we going to add to the park. So we added playgrounds. Here's an outdoor auditorium. People took this literally, so the neighborhood just moved in with tents. This is funny. This was in the Venice Biennale last year, and actually someone thought it photoshopped the tents, which is like really, they thought it was a rendering, which is quite, I would never Photoshop tents in my park, but whatever, it happened. And then the zero Earth strategy means that you can save, you don't only keep the biome intact, but you also save a lot of work. So rather than building buildings on top, you lower the buildings only half. And then the other half, by excavating the valley that we made to connect the two halves of the park, you kind of put these hills on top of the buildings, which also helps to keep the park 85% park. We call these building earth buildings, and I'll show one as an example. So here you see how the buildings, there's only two buildings visible, the two stadiums that are hybrids also to be for the future of the city. But here you start to see how these hills also start to create kind of an embedding of nature and architecture in a way that is more easygoing and gentle. And then boom, the result. So what I keep saying about this valley, so the park was cut in half by a river and a road, a pretty big road. What is it? 6 lanes, I think. So in real Dutch thinking, we proposed a valley. The landscape architect was Jerry van Eyck from Melk Landscape Architects. We came on the same idea, let's make a valley under the road instead of an underground shopping mall. Underground shopping malls, terribly unsustainable, artificial lighting, artificial air, everything artificial, depressing, also bad for our little psyches. We're sensitive enough as it is. So we propose, instead of this underground shopping mall, a valley that has glass pavilions, quite large spaces underground with glass facades, bridges over it, escalators back to the middle sections as shortcuts, and little tunnels under the road, and of course lots of plants, sprinklers, and porous pavements. This is in the valley. It's quite beautiful how you immediately feel like you're in a tiny village. This was my favorite little coffee shop. We designed all the pavilions also. This is very unusual for China. We did a lot of detailing. On top you see the solar wings with solar film. But then the beauty is at night when everyone stops working, they will go down in here to have a coffee or have dinner, or there's a little comic club, there's art galleries, shops. It's quite a beautiful little microcosm of things. And then, as I said, the two stadiums, I'll give only one example. I don't want to do too long today, but like this is one of the stadiums that is then after the games a concert hall. So this is not a neutral building that is open for all possibilities. This is actually a mutant that will transform after the Asian Games, automatically pre-designed into something that is a concert hall. So for us, it was quite important to think, if you do that, what kind of typology do you create? Because if it looks like a stadium, it is a stadium. So in these little diagrams on the top left, you see the perfect stadium. It's a one-liner. What is happening on the inside, you see on the outside. We started to intersect the inner and outer balls and shifting it, so there starts to be a more fluid connection from the in to the outside with a little balcony overlooking the wetlands. Surfaces start to intersect, so literally the building became an intersection of two potential programs. And less easy to define what it exactly is, which opens, I think, it also up for interpretation of the neighbors that have decided this is their favorite spot for selfies. They have adopted the alien. And then here you start to see these intersections are like a steel and glass digrid, and a brass shingled facade. That is, the brass is a very thin layer on recycled aluminum. Shingles, of course, because it's easy to negotiate the double curved surfaces. And I love this photo because two things. There's actually no scaffolding in these projects. They were built only in 4 years, right? It's 2 million square foot buildings. They did everything with these little cranes and these heroes. I call them heroes because, I mean, you know, honestly, sitting there welding this diagram together. Then these shingles by the team, we had an amazing team in China. They parametrically calculated the 8,000 shingles to have only 85 different shapes. We decided to assist in speed and cost control to leave the glass of the diagrid planar, which means this building is so large that these glass sheets are 5 by 7 meters. It's like unreal how big the building is. The building is close to 400,000 square feet. And for each glass section, we designed eyelids so that the glass is planar, but you get this beautiful 3D facade. But as you can see, the building is so large that you hardly see my eyelids, which I was very proud of. But yeah, they become kind of smoothed out because of the size of the building. Under the roof, you see glass windows that are automatically open to let the hot air out and the cool air in. And then this is the mutant aspect of the building where you start to see these intersections and meeting of surfaces. The inside is all clad in bamboo. I gave Josh this little lecture already, but sorry, Josh, I'll do it again. So my mission in life is to get people out of wood into bamboo. Why? Because bamboo absorbs in carbon and produces in oxygen in 7 years, what takes it 340. We need trees to breathe. And a tree is not a forest, what I said. So we need the forest, the old forest, to stay and have their biome, because our world, the biggest carbon sink is the forest and the oceans, and we're very fast depleting them. So from now on, we can only use bamboo, not wood. Trees stay in the ground and create a little biome. That's my mission in life. So there you have it. Bamboo is also really beautiful, as you see, and it's a great product that is very bendable and very resistant to fungi and molds, and beautiful. So yeah, here you see the scale of the building. That's me. I'm 6 foot tall, so you can imagine how big the building is. And then this is the stadium as we created it. The building has a lot of daylight. Also in the center is a skylight. We cannot obviously have sunlight in the eyes of the players, so there's a deflector under there that you see there that deflects the light back up. And then this was quite funny when we found this little movie online, when there's actually a Olympic ping pong game going on. I didn't know those existed, but it was quite a find. With a lot of judges, as you can see. That judge must be very dizzy at the end of it. But then this is the concert. So already last Christmas, this 6,500 seats were all filled by a very famous Chinese singer. One of the people in my office was actually by coincidence there. And it was amazing to see how easy it transformed into a concert hall. This is how it looks. It's actually, so the river comes by in the front and then 2 bridges approach it. And then next to it is an earth building. So we have 2 hybrid buildings, the 2 stadiums, actually 3. The third one is the valley/shopping, and earth buildings. Now, what is quite funny about the earth buildings is that they're earth, as you can see here, but the sprinkles you see here in the roof are actually skylights. So even the earth buildings, we wanted to have naturally ventilated and natural daylighting. So it's a really weird, really synthetic nature as architecture. The other thing is you see these deep cuts here in the building. Nature, if it's nature, it operates like nature, like the valley had to have access for fire trucks. But it's also a building, so it needs egress corridors. So quite funny is that this whole building, which is several layers underground with Olympic pools and sport fields and capacity for conventions even, then has these egress corridors that are like a whole architecture in themselves, and really spectacularly sculptural spaces, very beautiful. You see some little grass bits in the end there. But then this is on the roof of the same building. So really lovely was that the locals have taken over the gardening. There is an army of gardeners, but they're in orange little outfits. These people you see here are just people that decided to come and help and figure out how to keep this beautiful natural area intact. So although you're on a building here, it is, as you see, quite natural and quite lovely how it balances out the architecture. And then to end, I give you a little overview of a recent movie. Here on the bridge, you see a bunch of people doing some square dancing, which is kind of interesting to see how they took over the space and they do Tai Chi and yoga and all kinds of things in the park, and obviously camping a lot. So this is in the first building. You'll see the other building. I didn't show you that because it gets too long, but yeah. So the beauty of the diagrid is, and we introduced a superdome in the building, is that the building is completely column free. So that means it's highly flexible, easy to adapt to different functions. There was the playground in pink. This is in the valley. And then you see people running and walking over. There were 8 bridges, viaduct and aqueduct, lots of porous pavement. So it's also a very infrastructural project, escalators, as you can see here. A lot of shortcuts also to understand it as a very easy and accessible and very porous park to the neighborhood. This is the building. There were some people doing Tai Chi. That's the building I didn't show you. This is a 125-meter free-span wing for shading that shades viewers, players, but also the glass facade here at the entrance, where there's a little class getting an instruction on what a sponge city is. And then this very beautiful at night with all the solar lighting and energy. And then, of course, a massive team. So I already explained massive collaboration between Melk Landscape and Toronto Tomasetti engineers, both structural, facade, and environmental. And of course, an extended Chinese team that were all fully on board with getting this done. A lot of this is in this book that you might not know, that is really a manual, not a monograph, and talks a lot about how to innovate architecture into something that might be more future forward, less carbon footprint, and minimizes natural resources. That's it. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Winka, that's so inspiring. I love seeing the range of that work. So if people have questions, feel free to throw it in the chat. I can allow you to ask yourselves, or I will ask for you. But I can also sort of kick it off a little bit. Before the presentation, before the session here, we talked a little bit about the difference between trees and a forest. And I was in Copenhagen a few weeks ago, and I was remarking about how sort of beautiful and sustainable it seemed, and you were like, well, maybe not so fast. And I was wondering if you could recount sort of a little bit of that story that you were telling me. And describe, like, what is the difference between something that might seem very natural and like what is sort of a better definition of the natural.
Yeah, it's really what is interesting. A tree is not a tree, or a tree is not a forest. And why I'm saying that is, in our innocence, we have understood a tree to be a carbon sink, which it is, right? And hence we thought, okay, if we build buildings from it, we freeze the carbon footprint in the building. But the problem is, what we've done is we've taken down old forests that are this microecology of everything that constitutes a forest, including low plants, mixed trees, fungi, mushrooms, there are fungi, spores, molds, the whole thing is important to survive. If we take down these trees, we take down the biome and we replace it with 3,000 birch trees, which we are currently doing, because we're saying, well, we're replacing the trees, but we're not replacing the biome. So that is a massive calculation mistake that actually Denmark currently has to go through. And I read an article of a Danish microbiologist that said they made a massive mistake. They thought they could take down old forests and replace the trees. But you can't replace the trees with the same tree 3,000 times. It's not the same as the complexity of the microecology that a forest used to be. So, which means you deplete the earth, you kill the soil, you don't filter the water anymore in the same way. So you start to disrupt almost everything. There's no more plants, there's no more birds, insects. So you get such, they destroyed nature and they replaced it with fast growing trees. And that is just on all levels wrong. It's actually such a mistake that it's kind of daunting how everyone keeps promoting it and still doesn't understand that.
Yeah, and I think I was sharing with you that we've been involved in a number of these projects where there's a lot of wood in these spaces, often to signify that they're ecologically conscious.
Yeah.
I was walking through a major tech headquarters, just last week, and there was just a ton of beautiful, like I think there were like literally hardwoods that were that were meant to suggest that it was like a natural environment or an organization that cared about nature.
Yeah, yeah, no, totally. And that happens a lot. But it would look the same if you use bamboo. No one, actually, most people don't know that bamboo looks like that. It looks exactly like wood because it's actually a big grass. It's a ginormous grass, but it does look like wood and it's more flexible and durable. So it's actually very easy to change that thinking around. I think it takes a moment to do that, but it's not a miracle. All these products exist already. They're like similarly priced, if not cheaper, and more durable and more flexible. So yeah. It's not a major adjustment, but it is a major adjustment in thinking and all these computer models and calculations of carbon sinks and the way we use the replacement of the carbon sink. It's like all has to be rethought, and that's maybe not so great for all those conferences based on wood.
Yeah, well, and you'd mentioned before that some of the data is a little bit, or our obsession with data can kind of lead us into some bad places that
Well,
we
it's a justification, right? It becomes a justification, and it's a partial justification because it's not holistic. It only takes one aspect. The one aspect is correct, but then you forget the biome, right? So on a one-to-one level, it's okay, but a one-to-everything level, it's wrong.
So Jose Antonio had a question. Jose, did you want to ask yourself, or do you want me to ask for you? Give him a few beats. Is a mycelium a good metaphor concept narrative for you to work creating spaces? That was the question.
It's a mycelium, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my friends are all growing mycelium bricks.
Okay.
Another one is hempcrete, right? Like the only real, you have to kind of rethink how you build because they're all compression-based materials, right? They're not tensile strength, they're compression-based. So you'll still need some sort of structure behind them, but absolutely, mycelium is really good. Mycelium is also self-healing. So if you make bricks out of it and you stack them, they heal together, they grow together. You can stop the growth by freezing them and or applying a finish on them. So you can also stop it so they don't keep going. It's a little slow process, but it's definitely something that's being researched in major ways and probably a really good one. I think hempcrete is pretty known in the US already, especially friends of mine have pretty large company in the lower states. I forget exactly which one, maybe South Carolina, maybe. A big hempcrete facility. So yeah, there's several things that are being developed.
I wanted to see if you could maybe unpack a little bit more about the hopeful monsters and how that relates to your architecture practice.
I love that. So mutants and monsters. So we think,
Yeah.
I have a book coming out called
Oh,
Mutants and
fantastic.
Monsters. And it was really hilarious because it's a Swiss publisher. And I thought they're going to go crazy over it because what does that have to do with architecture? And how is that even good, right? And so I was all ready to explain to them that the flowers mutate and that made them into hopeful monsters, and hopeful monsters are the way forward. So what my hope is by looking at this organic intelligence of not only surviving disasters, but cleaning it up and transforming yourself to become stronger, better, and a new lineage. How can we learn as architects from that and start to use that as ways out of global warming and all the effects that are connected to it? So yeah, that is really the thing. So I was ready to explain this to the publisher. You know, I'm Dutch, Swiss are very similar, so we're always pretty like, you know, whatever, sarcastic, cynical, whatever. And they said, great. Then I never got the chance to explain it to them. They liked monsters and mutants, which was like really shocking. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether I actually know what I mean. But I wrote the text, so I mean, I guess if they read the book, since they put it together, I guess they'll read it.
Do you think of these projects as monsters and mutants? I mean, is that a framing that you have as you're sort of considering a building and how it sort of adapts to its environment?
Yeah, the research is pretty recent. So monsters and mutants are really something we started to think about with the Asian Games, when we realized if you design a stadium and you say it's going to be a hybrid, it will never be a hybrid. It will always be a stadium. So already in the competition phase, I was freaking out over that when one Saturday came to the office with 2 perfect stadiums, and I was like, oh man, that's never going to be a hybrid. So you know, I needed someone brave, so I took an intern, a really great guy, and I said to him, we're going to pollute this thing, so just save the original and let's just kill it. And so we made 16 monsters out of it. And one I just fell in love with, and that is the one that it is now. And it literally is more or less what it was when we intersected it. So yeah, it is, and it's what's happening. So people have adopted it because they don't quite get it. They see it, it's beautiful, but it's weird. It's not symmetrical. It's all these wobbling, intersecting, strange things, but they shine nicely. So, you know, it's like a weird flower in the park, and they just, yeah, they're constantly photographing it, investigating it, taking selfies with it. It's quite fun to see how they have adopted it as a child.
Well, it's interesting because I would imagine that throughout the course of your practice, the tools that you're using are different. And then also your ability to kind of create those remixes and those monsters like that's just become much more. And then I would imagine with AI, it's probably going to blow up even more. Just your
Yeah,
ability to constantly remix ideas. I'd just be curious, like how that, and you'd mentioned prototyping. How is that kind of remixing and creating monsters and mutants like have become part of your process?
yeah. I think for a long time ago already, we realized that I just didn't like any systems I found in the world. So the book, actually, this strange object book that I just showed you, that came because I was explaining my work to Ricardo de Vesa from Actar in Spain. And he said, you really should do a book on how you work, because you work more like an industrial designer. You know, I see a problem and I just find a manufacturer that's willing to develop something with me, and I just figure out a new facade, be it with translucent stone or folded glass or you know, the climate skin. And he said that is, you know, he loved the fact that it was sort of a mix between biologist, industrial design, architecture, investigations. We work quite fluidly. So if someone in the factory has a better idea than we do, we like that. You know, we go for that stuff. So in the end, a lot of these people then also come back to you with new materials and say, do you want to try it out? That's actually how we found the translucent stone.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
so yeah, these kind of investigations also allow you to think, like already the building in 2000 had passive solar. We weren't talking about passive solar then. I had windows that had recycled wood. Um, in them on the inside and then aluminum on the outside, so minimizing the amount of aluminum. Yeah, I mean, a lot of like sustainable things when actually no one really was talking about that. The Inkscape meditation startup, we worked only with bamboo and linen. And made it very lightweight. And instead of construction drawings, we made a building manual so that people could build it locally. You don't have to use trucks to drive it through the country. So things like that, to just sort of rethink the norm and see what you can minimize and how you can go around the normal ways.
You know, you'd mentioned you mentioned before trying to make spaces that have multiple uses, you know, and you were saying that like if you try to design from the outset, that it won't work. Like how do you design for a space that has multiple uses? Because you know my background is I work with a lot of museums, and
Yeah.
you know they're always trying to figure out how do they become more sort of meaningfully embedded in the communities, and how can they be useful. And I'm curious, you know, what is the methodology that where you sort of figure out what those uses might be, or how do you make something more useful?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, it was pretty easy because you know the stadium once we also changed the seating, which is quite funny because you have to follow Olympic rules. But we changed the shape of the seating to look more theater-like. And in the beginning, they were all like, "No, you can't do that. It has to follow Olympic rules." I said, "Well, we followed the Olympic rules," and they checked it, and you know, it was okay with a small adjustment here and there. We were still okay. So. That is one way. And then the other way is what I said by just, we optimized all the structures. And that was, of course, thanks to Thornton Tomasetti and the geniuses in China also that actually were going for it. But like a superdome is a super light roof that is very deep in the middle and very thin on the ends and kind of spans back to itself. That then sits only on the inner bowl and then carries out over the outer bowl. So it's just the facades are actually suspended, and that's why we don't have columns, and it's very, very light. I think overall we saved 1,120 tons of steel.
That's amazing.
From traditional buildings. So very, very light buildings. Actually, the buildings sometimes are so light that we had to anchor them back to the ground.
Amazing.
Which was fun, yeah, especially that wing, the shading wing. 125 meters, what is that, 375 feet or something, free span, and only covered by linen. So that wants to fly off. So there's some serious abutments holding that thing down, because otherwise it's gone.
All right. So Jose Antonio has another question. I'll ask this again. Are you inspired by the children's mindset in your work? Do you work with them? Monsters and Mutants approach seems to be a lot about your inner child playing.
God, that guy just got my secret.
Okay. Okay, nailed it. Okay.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, I always think if you can intrigue a child, you've won, no? Because they're not as bored and as blasé as we are. So I think, you know, the idea, it was actually also Rem Koolhaas, who is, of course, someone who I learned a lot from when I was a child or a younger architect. He said that if something doesn't make you smile or doesn't have a sense of humor, it's not serious. And I always loved that.
I love that.
It's sort of the idea that if you, because it's the intelligence lies into the lightness also, no? I mean, the lightness of thinking, or the understanding that things should be having a sort of a natural ease, although we all know that it's much harder to get that done. But yeah, absolutely. I think it should be, I love the fact that these kids love, you know, we were actually, when we were standing in the building to make the perfect distilled photo and the light came in beautiful. It's when these little kids walked in a little line. And I was like, oh my God, that is just brilliant. You know, the teeny weeny with all these little light blue jackets on. It was just, yeah, it was amazing. But I think it is important to think that architecture, if you feel like you can interact with it, like how people have adopted these buildings is quite special. I learned that a little bit from the first large building we did was that folded glass one. And I lived there myself, and I started to notice how people who live there talked about the building like a person. And we're very protective of it. Like, our building this, or people are looking at, we should protect the glass on the bottom, whatever. So it was interesting to see how people were very emotionally tied to the building. And I always remember that and thought this is quite important, that a building has identity, like we do, and character.
That's interesting. Well, I think, it's because you mentioned the word feeling, and I think that if something makes you feel a certain way, maybe you give it a personality. Or you can. It's easier to embody if there's if it is giving you an intentional feeling. If there's some thought around that. Um, I think we have a few. I would before we leave, I would love you to talk about the dentist office a little bit, because I thought that was a really interesting conversation we had. Can you talk about your sort of yogic dentist office that you designed?
Yeah, I mean, this is like, this is one of those very small things we do in between. If we like people, we tend to design anything really. I mean, you could ask me for a table. If I like you, I'll do it. If I don't, I don't.
Love
But
it.
this was one of those cases. And so our dentist asked to do the clinic, and she asked us in a really interesting way. She said, people are always so stressed out when they come to the clinic. Could you design it more like a day on the beach? And I thought it was a really fun way. I mean, I'm mortified myself of dentists, so I identify with the whole stress situation. So we started to really think, how can you make a Zen-like spa experience in a dental clinic? And had some really beautiful little designs in it, and gorgeous little lights and plants, and acoustic lining of the walls so you don't hear the thing very much. Natural materials, of course, and fun lighting. And yeah, and it turned out to be this super Zen spa experience. And she actually said it literally, people are different when they come into the treatment rooms. So it's, yeah, it's nice. And it was a fun thing to try, because you're like, oh, I mean, knowing myself, how do you even do that? But it's actually interesting that it is not that hard to get that done. Much
Yeah.
easier than I thought. There's also a lot of like blue glass and transparency and strange light coming in, and that helps a lot too.
Yeah, no, it's actually, as I've done a bunch of these future spaces talks, you sort of see some pattern matching.
Yeah,
And I think, there's people who talk about like sort of human-centered design, and I think that also feels very much about like what you're talking about with biomes, and
yeah,
what you're talking about, which is just make, the person is integrated into that environment. They should feel part of, like a tree is something is different than a forest. It's something that's dropped in, as opposed to something that feels integrated. And I would imagine that the visitor to that dental office probably feels a little bit more integrated and cared for in that environment.
yeah. And you're distracted because you look at there's some weird details and some strange ways of sitting. We also change the seating has this like slivery thing where you can sit backwards or forwards or whatever. So people are
Yeah.
sitting in other ways and sitting in other ways, and tend to speak to each other because they're suddenly sitting across from each other. These kind of little things also help. You play with the norm a little bit, and things shift. So that's
Yeah, it's they're being cared for, they're being considered, which
yeah,
probably really changes how they exist in that space. So
yeah.
we're about at time. Um, I think unless there's any like one last question. Nope, just a shout out to well-designed dental clinics. But okay, do you have any sort of parting thoughts besides to buy bamboo for the community here?
No, I just love that you guys are coming from all over the place. So super interesting. I would love to hear from all of you, but I guess that's really difficult.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, very nice to have such a great group of people from so many places. And yeah, if you're interested in what we're doing, even to chat, just contact us. Our website is easy. It's archi-tectonics.com. So it's not archi-tectonics.com. So very easy. Emails are on there. So we're very reachable and easy to chat with. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Hi, Donna. I miss you.
So big, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us here. I'll send out in the follow-up email the links to the books. I will be picking up a copy. Winka, thank you so much. I thought that was incredibly inspiring. Thanks everybody for joining us. Hope to see you guys again next week.
Thank you, Josh.
All right, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.